And Brahmaputra is a very special case because in case of Brahmaputra, the amount of water that it carries and the topography through which it traverses are highly diverse. Probably no other river system in the world has got a kind of a diversity in terms of the topography, in terms of the physics, is there. So from that angle, it's a very challenging kind of a topic. However, there are issues which have to be looked into from a national point of view, and also from a local point of view. The issues in water sector have got two dimensions. One is an anecdotal dimension. An anecdotal dimension means, I will say that there, of course, the communities are highly fragmented, and then each community would like to view this in its own particular context, and its own, and for them it is very vital. So it is not that they are doing something wrong on that front, but then there are also a kind of a overall societal context, and then overall kind of national and strategic context. So all these issues have to be really brought together, and nobody can really say that we have the overriding kind of a overriding kind of a right over something which which will completely kind of negate the right of the larger community, or right of a bigger group. So this particular aspect has been a very challenging aspect in water resources in general, and in Brahmaputra it is quite more, because in case of Brahmaputra the local communities are also kind of highly segregated, so to say, socially and also economically and politically. And because of that strong segregation boundaries, some of the issues which are not really creating that kind of a challenge will create a challenge in case of the areas which we are dealing with. So that aspect also has to be kept in view, that we have to see that how the mutual understanding between the communities can also develop. Now, the next important aspect is that as far as the underwater domain awareness is concerned, it's a very useful kind of an initiative. But that initiative is basically a reactive initiative. The action is provided by the nature. The action is provided to you by the topography. The action is provided to you by the climate. And the rest of the things are basically reacting to it. So in this kind of an action and reaction kind of phenomena, where you do not have any control over the action, you can't change the topography, you can't change the climate, or climate will change in its own manner, which will be a global phenomena, and you don't have any control over it. And likewise, all these issues will have to be brought together. Yes, there is a need. In fact, in case of all river basins, there is a need that there has to be a kind of a common platform where the information can be exchanged, and where the very comprehensive and an authentic kind of information is available, so that any other community, when it tries to examine its interest vis-a-vis the other issues that are coming up at the hand, then they should have certain amount of explicit and certain amount of clear kind of information that is available to them. However, in case of the clarity, the areas of the areas of science, the areas of technology bring in their own complexities, and no area is actually perfect. That is true. Now the question that comes up is that when we say that the data is not available, or what kind of data, then what we have seen is that we actually try to say that you get this data for me. As a consumer, you are interested in a particular data, but then the products that are available are different. Now each of the products always gets created for a particular purpose. So it is the also a kind of a part responsibility of the consumer to see that which product really suits them. That's number one. And then which product can be tailored, or how much of a product can be really required in order to carry out their own work. And this kind of an area is also missing in case of Brahmaputra. That's a very unfortunate aspect of it. But the fact remains is that in case of Brahmaputra, we do not have such kind of comprehensive kind of a data exchange, which can then create an awareness about the implications of what we are doing and what we are not doing. For example, I mean, Miss Rita Ganguly Das brought up this issue that when some some kind of an adversarial kind of relationship is translating onto the water resources, then what should be your actions? You cannot really look at I can be a kind of a community. I can be a cluster of something like, let's say, 20 villages, or five five tribes. But then the global context in which these certain things are happening also will have to be appreciated, because I am safe only when the nation is safe. I am safe when the overall situation is manageable. So these aspects are also quite severe in case of Brahmaputra Basin. At times, what sometimes gets talked about are the issues which are not really, if you really implement them in that very sense, then they will actually create a kind of a harm to somebody else. Now, for example, in case of Brahmaputra, the what basin is characterized by extremely diverse kind of topography, and with a very severe kind of a climate. The climatic action in Brahmaputra is a very peculiar kind of an action, where there is a kind of a clear-cut boundary at the India-China border, as we perceive it. There is a very clear-cut boundary. If you look at the rainfall patterns, the entire flood that gets generated in Brahmaputra is primarily coming out of the Indian territories. But the lean flows are coming out of the Chinese territories. And if you miss any of these two, then what happens is that you have a situation where you will be kind of having a huge disaster in your hand, and coupled with that, there will be a huge kind of a shortfall in your hand, and that is happening within the same year. So this kind of conundrums are there, these kind of threats are there. This threat perception also has to be kind of brought into the dialogue. That what are the threats? How are you going to really mitigate them? What are the options available to you to mitigate them? And to some extent, government has been working on these kind of issues. But the propagation of these issues at the lower level are not really very clear. So this is a challenge in case of Brahmaputra, where the information exchange has not been very clear. The next important part that is happening is that at the governance level, the challenges are pretty large, and somehow or other, this integration of these challenges in a politically coherent kind of a way have not really happened. So what happens is that there are kind of disjointed kind of voices and disjointed kind of areas which have to be really brought in. And for that, your idea of having a stakeholder participation is a very important and a very good idea. And for that, what is required is that we need to have set up the kind of coordinated dialogue mechanisms between the various entities. These entities are at the highest level. They will be, of course, concentrated at the state level. But then between the two states, we have to have this kind of coordination mechanisms. At the union government level, we have been trying to establish this kind of mechanisms for a very long time. But unfortunately, the political realities do not really are amenable to ultimately kind of, going towards that kind of a utopia, I would say. But then at least there has to be a kind of a common understanding of mutual interests, and whether these mutual interests are getting served by whatever is being done by the various parties or by the various groups. This particular issue requires a interdisciplinary knowledge. This requires an interdisciplinary understanding. And this interdisciplinary understanding has to be developed at every level. It is not merely a government's responsibility to have all the interdisciplinary knowledge. It is also required at the community level to understand that. You have to understand that, I mean, if a flood is occurring, what could be the remedial measures through which this can be sorted out. The problems are so big that, like Professor Mirza Rahman just now brought in, like the question of embankments. The issue is that the problem is so big, the investments required are so high, that you cannot really think in a situation where you can say that I will always have the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution will be beyond your resources, because your resources are common national resources, and you cannot really have a situation where you will spend resources only on one aspect, and there will be nothing on the any other aspect. So this particular area also at times requires you to do some kind of a stopgap solutions, and you cannot deny those stopgap solutions, because if you don't do that stopgap solutions, the resultant disaster would have been much larger. So the interventions that are being made also have to be understood in the context of economy, in the context of national strategy, in the context of individual comfort or community level understanding, and then there has to be, of course, the adjustment between the various things, and that is where the governance comes in, because there is only one common agency in any kind of a modern kind of state, which is a nation. And at the nation and at the governance level, as it is devolved down the line through the state governments and through the local bodies, and this particular area of governance has to have more understanding of the issues involved, and has to be more responsive, because the people who are likely to feel harm, or people who are likely to feel encroached upon, also have a kind of a requirement which has to be understood and which has to be met with. You cannot meet everything in one go, but then at least what we have seen is that if you make an economic sense of what is happening to them, and with that economic sense, if they can if they can be kind of given a kind of an outcome which is a little better than what they have, then this kind of resistance and this kind of mismatches can be reduced to a great extent. So there are actually very multiple kind of areas. There are certain constraints and there are opportunities. The constraints have to be converted into opportunities. For example, in case of Brahmaputra, you have a constraint. You have a constraint in a geological sense, like what you have in case of let us say northwestern Himalayas, where you have got a frontal kind of foothills, shivaliks and others, who are different than the greater Himalayas. In case of northeast, you have no such boundary. The greater Himalayas suddenly end into a plain. You look at Pasighat, what happens? Now, when you are facing with these kind of issues, then the translation of these issues into opportunities have to be understood, and those kind of developments have to be properly sold to the communities, and then communities also have to be brought in. And there is a lot of political also kind of an and governance kind of issues that are also there, which has to be brought in. But all said and done, yes, I mean, all those things cannot be done in a day. We have to have a lot of work still pending on us. But the fact remains is that we need to have what I will call basin dialogues. See, I mean, when you look at it from a geographer's point of view, or when you look at it from a social point of view, then you actually look at the river as a kind of a linear feature, and you talk about that linear feature. But that is one of the most misunderstood kind of concepts in the non-hydrology communities. The river is not a river, it's a basin. The basin has to be understood well. And then you will understand the river in a better sense. And for understanding the basin, yes, you have to understand all these issues. Like underwater domain definitely also addresses to the topographical issues. The domain can also address to the hydrological and climatic issues, and then also will also understand how the water environment, or the environment which is fed by the water and which is sustained by the water, is really working. So for this, a kind of a good kind of dialogues have to be there. The various parts of the basin which are also contributing to the river. Today, the water that you see in Ganga or in Brahmaputra is not the water of Brahmaputra. It is water of every square inch of that particular territory that has ultimately translated into that particular flow at that point. So it is not that the stakeholder who is directly affected by the river is the stakeholder. A stakeholder is also located in a several hundred kilometers away, and his interests and your interests will also have to be gelled, will also have to be matched. So this is an issue where a very strong stakeholder participation is necessary. A very strong stakeholder inter-understanding is necessary. And for that, developing such mechanisms can come through the governance, because otherwise it becomes very difficult that the individual structures or individual initiatives can actually give you the difference. So we need to really look at the Brahmaputra also in that context, and we need to have a kind of a good governance structure which is able to provide adequate space to the individual stakeholders, also make them educated or make them understand about the mutual interests. And those mutual interests and those mutual, cooperative kind of, area will have to really come to a governance model or to a governance area, which can then kind of felt generally satisfactory by everybody. So I feel that we need to look at this kind of studies in this manner, and that will probably give us a kind of a solution. Even though there are no solutions, we haven't have a single basin in the world where I can say that all the issues have been solved. So issues will remain. We are changing. We are continuously changing our climate. We are continuously changing our development paradigms. We are continuously changing our economic concepts of what is a good life is, and then all this ultimately reflect on the water. So we will have to really work in this direction for Brahmaputra. So thank you very much, and it was a great pleasure interacting with all of you and learning about all your views, and it gives you a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much for organizing this seminar, and also thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of